Did you know that we are all deeply, deeply religious people? And maybe this will offend some of you. I secretly kind of hope so. I was having a chat with my neighbor recently, and he was kind of offended by that. But let me walk through this a tiny bit. We're deeply religious. We're religious about many things. So we say people are religious about exercise. They're religious about diet. You say, yeah, that's not what it means to be religious. But don't we say that? And it turns out, actually, religion is one of those words that nobody can agree on the definition. Interesting aside, also, nobody can agree on the definition of rationality. So all the definitions of rationality think that the other definitions of rationality are irrational. That's just a fun little thing. Anyway, so back to religion. We are religious. I hope you are religious about your personal hygiene. If not, the people around you can spread the chairs apart a little bit. I remember the day that Laura and I got married, how my grandfather, her grandfather, my kid's great-grandfather, how he came up to me, and his bit of marriage advice is he said, it was over 50 years at that point, for over 50 years, I have kissed Audrey on the cheek and told her I loved her before I went to bed. He was religious about it. We're religious about watching The Bachelorette, fess up. We're religious about American versus import. That's for those of you who are older. How about Apple versus Android, Tim Hortons versus Monogram, our political opinions, cutting taxes, increasing government social spending. Parents, we're religious, let's be honest, about mealtime, right? Like, we secretly judge one another all the time about the way that you handle your kids' food idiosyncrasies or sleep. Again, like, no, I got the right way. We're religious. And one of the meanings of religion is that you have a conviction and you consistently live it out. We're religious. But let's push this a little bit further. And by the way, please note, so often religious is a derogatory term. But we don't even use it consistently that way. In this case, it's great. Like, I really hope she's not here, and I'm certain she is, but I hope my wife is religious about monogamy, right? Like, being religious about things is good in many cases. It just depends what the thing is. Somebody was telling me recently they live downtown, and they like walking in some of the fanciest parts of Mount Royal and neighborhoods like that. And they said, but everybody knows I don't belong. And I said, what do you mean? And they said, well, I don't have AirPods. A different friend was telling me he was in South Korea, and he said, I can't believe the way that the sort of religion of status symbols is taken to a whole nother level. He says, everybody I meet, they have a certain car, they dress with certain clothes, and almost all of them are in desperate debt. But if you don't belong. And here's another definition of religion. I obey, therefore I'm accepted. And again, we could easily and naturally use that of traditional religions, Judaism, Islam, things like that, but we can use it of the religion of status, can't we? You walk into a room like this, and some of you know who's got the style, and the interesting thing is there's many different religions of status. And there's even the people who say, no, I don't play the status game. My religion is to not play the status game. Like, nobody cannot pursue status like I cannot pursue status. I want to push this a little further, this extended little Religion 101. I obey, therefore I'm accepted. This often leads to either pride, look at how I'm obeying, or insecurity, I'm not obeying. But the way that this rolls out in general is that the way to stop bad things and cultivate good stuff is rules. Rules. And once again, and please hear this is critical, rules are a good thing. The other night, there were these kids just ripping down the road by our house. And so like a 4-year-old kid late at night, last night, cruises across, doesn't look at all. So if I hadn't been looking, I would have plowed this little kid, and that would have been terrible. And so I'm thinking rules are a good thing. Like, what if every street in Calgary was like the Autobahn? It wouldn't go that great. Or, I remember seeing in the news a couple years ago a garment factory, I think in Bangladesh, that collapsed because of poor construction. As somebody who's renovating right now, sometimes building codes irritate me. But I'm kind of grateful for rules. Rules are not bad, but rules can be bad. And so in this case, think of bureaucracy. Think of all of the political campaigns to cut red tape. And I'm deliberately trying to stretch where you would normally associate the word religion. You don't think of those things as religious, but follow me and see that it's a right use of the word. Now, let's push this rules thing a little further. Rules can be a bad thing. Rules can actually hinder or stop the very things that they were intended to aid or to accomplish. And so once again, I give you bureaucracy when it goes bad. I remember as kids, we played this card game with my German farmer grandpa in the States called Sheep's Head. And so we learned this game. We would go down there every few years, and we'd play it a little bit in between. But we'd go down there, and I distinctly remember these moments when somebody would make a play, and it was usually a good play, and then my grandpa would say, "Oh," and we'd say, "What?" He'd say, "That's not how they play." But it's a good play. Like, are you just mad that we're winning? No, but that's not how they play. Rules so many times actually get in the way. Like, well, why do we play, Grandpa? To win. I won, so pipe down. But this happens all the time. Think of the classic education rule. You must sit still in your desk. Why? So that we can teach and we have this right teaching environment, except that there's a lot of kids who learn better when they're not sitting still. And so this rule can get in the way of the education. And one more step here. The rules often accumulate in such a way that we don't even remember what they're for, and we get religious about the rules. And this is the terminal stage. Not truly, but sort of. And so again, think of education. Think of a card game where the goal is to play it the right way, but apparently not to win. Think of education, where the goal is a peaceful classroom, but not learning. Let's push this one a little further, because this is what it's all building to. This is one of the things that has completely reoriented my life, realizing that this pattern, this religious highway, is everywhere. And so often we associate religion with conservatism, with tradition, with things like Christianity. But this kind of religion that I'm describing is everywhere. I remember when my sister-in-law asked me to read this book about Buddhism, not written by a Christian fellow, and this fellow talked about how in his experience in Buddhist communities, how many times there are these rules and they faithfully, religiously keep the rules, but the rules have actually been added to so many times that they're actually not just getting in the way of, but they're stopping the very thing that they were designed to produce. I think of talking to my friends who are heavily involved in reconciliation work. I think of stuff I've seen in the anti-racism conversations, and many times rules accumulate to the point that they actually interfere with the very thing they were designed to aid. I'm picking on more progressives for a second, so let's pick on conservatives. I remember I just recently, let's go old conservative, I was reading about the Battle of Somme, a key battle in World War I. And it's a battle where there was an astonishing death toll, absolutely brutal. And I'm not a World War I expert, but two reasons I found as I read. One was the conservative doctrine that the officers were the nobility and the coal miners were the soldiers, the grunts in the trenches. But unfortunately, sometimes the nobility weren't very good officers. And second, remember my grandpa? The way we play. Well, the way we do war led them to approach an impossible position with barbed wire and all kinds of other things, and big machine guns shooting at the people. And they sent wave after wave of troops and watched them get mown down, because this is how we fight. I've seen this helicopter parenting. What do? We get so involved, we get so engaged, we add so many rules to keep our kids safe. And we end up with insecure, anxious children that cannot function in the world. Businesses, how many times have you heard stories of the way they do HR or hiring or firing or their marketing strategy, that it actually ends up undercutting the very thing they're trying to achieve, and on and on and on. But now, let's talk about some of us in this room. So it's interesting, some of the angriest, most self-righteous, bitter, mean people read their Bible and pray every day. But they didn't grow, to quote the old song. And let me give you just one more example. And honestly, this is just a smattering. I hope that you see this. I hope it clicks, because it is everywhere. You will see the world differently when you start looking for this pattern. Rules are good. But rules can be bad, and they often accumulate, and what's driving it is a need to be accepted. These deep human needs, the need for purpose. And then so many times the rules get detached from the very thing they were intended for. People don't even remember, and they don't know that they don't remember. But we'll talk about that more later. One more story of this. A couple centuries before Jesus comes, about 170 years, there's a civil war going on in Judea. And one day, the army, I think it's Antiochus Epiphanes, but I didn't look it up. He's attacking these Jewish rebels, and it's the Sabbath. And they literally do not fight back, because it's the Sabbath, and because if God is going to help the Jewish people, we must be faithful to the law. And so they allow themselves and their families to be slaughtered because they won't fight on the Sabbath. And that propels us pretty well into where we're going today. This is week 4 in the Gospel of Mark. We're in a series of controversy stories, or controversy, as the Australian commentator who I listen to likes to say. And I'm going to just read and comment here. This is a section where Jesus is continuing to minister. People are discovering who he is, and there's tensions growing. Now, John's disciples and the Pharisees, I won't go into it, but very different groups, were fasting. Some people came and asked Jesus, how is it that John's disciples and the disciples of the Pharisees are fasting, but yours are not? Ding, 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 rules. Jesus answered, how can the guests of the bridegroom fast while he's with them? I was at a wedding yesterday. I ate so much food. Like so much food. I kind of regretted it afterwards, to be honest, but it was really good. How can you fast when the bridegroom is here? They can't, as long as they have him with them. But the time will come when the bridegroom will be taken from them. On that day, they will fast. And then Jesus tells this little parable. No one sews a patch of unshrunk cloth on an old garment. Otherwise, the new piece will pull away from the old, making the tear worse. And no one pours new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise, the wine will burst the skins, and both the wine and the wineskins will be ruined. No, they pour new wine into new wineskins. This is the middle parable we've talked, or the middle section. There's 5 controversy stories, and this is the center one. And Jesus is making a simple point. His ministry is not fitting into their categories, their rituals, their rules. It's consistent. It it's in and out of, but it defies in ways that increasingly everyone is offended by. That last bit, you pour wine into a wineskin. What's the new old wineskin? What's the cultural reference? Well, wine ferments, it expands. And so if you fill up a wineskin that's already expanded, it has nowhere to go. Pop goes the weasel. And same thing with the cloth. A piece of cloth on an old garment, it's going to expand. It'll make the whole thing worse. Jesus is saying, look, what I'm doing is outside of your boxes and boundaries, the way you perceive them. Now, remember, I obey, therefore I'm accepted. I obey, therefore I'm accepted. What's the deal with this fasting stuff? Well, for the Jewish people, and I won't go into it, we've been doing lots of, do you see how the Old Testament is everywhere in the Gospels? We'll do a little less of that today. But this is a reference. The bridegroom is Yahweh. The Jewish people are waiting for God to renew his marriage covenant with the people. And the appropriate sign until they do that is fasting. So this isn't just about keeping a rule. Their very nation is on the line based on how they obey or don't. It's not petty. It's a big deal. And finally, just a quick aside. And remember, I said rules are good. And you're not going to hear me change that. Do you notice the part where Jesus says, when I'm gone, my followers will fast? Here's an interesting little tidbit for you. Did you know that basically every Christian in history until about 150 years ago fasted regularly? And then industrialization and commercialization took off. And we don't really like that kind of stuff anymore, do we? But interesting aside, for those of you who would say you follow Jesus, Jesus doesn't say like, fasting, take it or leave it. It's just another one of those rules. He says they'll fast. I'll leave that one for today. Next story, Jesus, Lord of the Sabbath. One Sabbath, remember when they wouldn't fight on the Sabbath? One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and as his disciples walked along, they began to pick some heads of grain. The Pharisees said to him, "Look, why are they doing what's unlawful on the Sabbath?" He answered, "Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need? In the days of Abiathar the high priest, he entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread, which is lawful only for priests to eat, and he also gave some to his companions. And then he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord, even of the Sabbath." I said before that rules often accumulate to the point that you don't even remember what they're there for. Let me read to you one of the original Sabbath commands from the Old Testament. This is what it says, Exodus chapter 23. 6 days do your work, but on the seventh day do not work. By the way, he's writing to a group of people that have been enslaved and done nothing but work, and nobody can remember a time when they did anything but work. 6 days do your work, on the seventh do not work, so that your ox and your donkey, note the rationale. It's kind of funny. So your ox and your donkey may rest, and so that the slave born in your household and the foreigner living among you may be refreshed. Be careful, though, to do everything that I have said to you. This tension is important. Rules are not bad. You take away the rules, every road's an Autobahn. Calgary's not a great place to live. God, many times, tells his people that he is very concerned about their obedience. Now, unpacking that a little bit, do you see the problem that would develop? 6 days, you shall do your work. The seventh day, do not work. What's the problem? It's kind of tricky, but how do you define work? Enter rules, right? 6 days you'll do your work, seventh day don't work, but what's work? And this spins in the Jewish consciousness for several hundred years by the time we get to Jesus. And it spins and it spins and it spins. And they treat it kind of like an elevator. When you go in an elevator, you hope that the people who designed it, the building code, the rules, It says like this elevator can take 1,200 pounds. I'm hoping it's rated for 5,000, right? I don't want that thing to fail. And that's what happened with Sabbath. Okay, it's a big deal. Be careful to observe my command. So we don't want to go anywhere near working on that day. And so rule and rule and rule and rule. And by the time you get to Jesus, there's a number of steps they can walk in a day. Because if you go for a long walk, you're working on the Sabbath. Sounds tiring, which is ironic for a day of rest. God, throughout the Old Testament, to give credit to these people and to the trouble of this, he rebukes his people for failing to keep Sabbath more than once. Isaiah chapter 1 is one of the places where you can see that and look that up. Again, everything is flowing from the Jewish scriptures to the gospel. And just one more, and this is an interesting point. Deuteronomy 23:25 makes a differentiation between a human being just grabbing some grain and taking a few kernels and eating it, and harvesting. And so the interesting point, do you remember, rules accumulate to the point that you don't even remember why they're there, or they start to interfere with the very thing they were intended to accomplish. And so here we are, and they say, your disciples, Jesus, are breaking the law. But that's not actually true. They're breaking the rules that were built up to make sure that we don't work. But they're not actually breaking the law. Just one more comment here, and then we'll move to the last story. Jesus, in responding to their criticism, uses David. And that's on purpose, because the Jewish people are longing for the son of David who will redeem them, save them, renew them. And so this is, have you ever been in an argument with somebody and you realize that somebody that they look up to disagrees with them and you could like name drop? You ever seen that? My brother's a big fan of Dr. Bruce Perry, so I imagine that he's a psychiatrist, researcher, kind of a who's who in the trauma world. There you are, Joel. And anyways, so Joel loves to talk about Dr. Bruce Perry. He's a great figure. His books are fantastic. And so I imagine, to help you get this point, that Joel and I are arguing about parenting, and we're brothers, so it's going to get heated. And then I say, but Joel, here is the clip where Dr. Bruce Perry says what I'm saying. And that's the end of the conversation. It is. When Jesus quotes David, here's the thing. Jesus is smart. And the lesson is, why do you keep arguing with this guy who wins every time? And so he goes right to it. He's like, this person that I know you won't argue with, David did it. And that's the end of the conversation. But then Jesus goes a step further and he makes this outrageous statement. The Son of Man, we talked about that last time. That's an exalted figure. That is outrageous enough. The Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. Jesus is claiming things about himself that are extraordinary. You cannot read the Gospels and say, this is just a smart guy, a wise teacher. He does not give you that option. One last story. Another time, Jesus went into the synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was there. I want you to turn on your imagination. I want you to imagine times when maybe you've seen somebody that wrestles with a disfigurement. Some of you have experienced that. There's a man there with a shriveled hand, and some of them were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus. So they watched him closely to see if he would heal on the Sabbath. Remember the Sabbath command? 6 days, you do your work. 7th day, don't. Do you remember the rationale given? So that even your animals get to rest. So that the foreigner, so that those most marginalized are taken care of. They get renewed. So here's Jesus, and they're watching him closely. Will he heal on the Sabbath? Jesus said to the man with the shriveled hand, stand up in front of everyone. When I imagine being that man, I get small inside. Imagine being in the center of that. But then Jesus asked them, not the man, them. which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill?" And they remained silent. He looked at them in anger. If your Jesus never gets angry, it's not the Jesus of the book. He looks at them in anger, deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts. And he says to the man, "Stretch out your hand." And he stretched it out, and his hand was completely restored. And then the Pharisees went out and began to plot with the Herodians how they might kill Jesus. This is a text about religion at its worst. Everyone is religious. Religion isn't always at its worst. It doesn't need to be at its worst. But religion so many times is at its worst. And this is a text of the worst of religion. They are looking for a reason to accuse Jesus. Sounds nice. Sounds like their religion is really producing something the world needs, right? It's the Sabbath, and the Sabbath is for the marginalized, and yet here they are using a marginalized person to bait Jesus. They have been so encapsulated as a people with what is work that they've forgotten why we don't work on Sabbath. Remember, the rules accumulate to the point that you don't even know what they're for anymore. And to take it one step further, two steps further actually. First, it ends saying the Pharisees and the Herodians work together and begin plotting to kill Jesus. So think of your bluest blue and your reddest red. And that's as close as I can get you to those two groups of people. And here they are. Those who are united about nothing are united in their desire to see the end of Jesus. And one last step, which I just pray grips you. It's not okay to heal on the Sabbath, but it's okay to plot murder. And absolutely, they believe that they are doing God's work. Religion at its worst is one of the ugliest things imaginable. And this isn't a matter of Christian or Muslim. Everybody is religious. Everybody, sooner or later, finds themselves in this place. We can easily take something like this and begin to bludgeon others. See, the thing about this is they don't know they're blind. They think they're right. And that is the nastiest thing. There's other religious sins. Hypocrisy, when you know better, you say one thing and you do another. That's a different thing. This is, I think I'm doing the right thing, and yet the right thing, I am so jaded, so blind that the right thing is plotting murder, but you can't heal someone on the Sabbath. And this is a human pattern that is everywhere. What do you do with this? Here's my suggestion. Turn it on yourself. Early in our marriage, Laura and I wrestled for many reasons, but one of them was my religion. I had ideas about what a good Christian did and the spiritual practices they had, and when Laura didn't exactly do things the way I thought she should, I didn't think of it this way. I thought I was doing good things, but I nagged and I guilted and I shamed and I suggested, and on it went. Laura and I were quite united in believing that to live in the West is to be called to generosity. We gave lots. But I remember there was just this, and this is the thing about religion, that's the big picture. We're united about so much, but there was this one portion where I had more of a heart for international development and relief, for things like clean water for the poorest of the poor. Laura is an extraordinary gift giver. And she's also an extraordinary host. If I asked, apart from those of you visiting, many of you, most of you have been in our home at some point. We've had hundreds and hundreds, probably thousands of visits in the years we've been married. And that was something Laura brought to our marriage. It's part of me now. It was not part of me when we got married. We disagreed. And I said, how can you throw parties when there's people without clean water? And on and on and on. I will never forget for the rest of my life, our best friends live in Edmonton. We were driving to Edmonton. And the day that I stopped being blind and started to see, and I remember this conversation that went on for a couple hours where I came to realize that I had been an impediment in the very thing that I wanted most for my wife, and she wanted most for herself. And it was one of the worst moments of my life. What do you do with this? I think you turn it on yourself. It's really easy to turn it on others. But I think you turn it on yourself. A great scholar, a Puritan named John Owen, says this. He says, "The person who understands the evil in his own heart is the only person who is useful, fruitful, and solid in his beliefs and obedience. The others only delude themselves and thus upset families, churches, and all other relationships. In their self-pride and judgment of others, they show great inconsistency." This is a case study of religion gone bad. And so let me wrap it up this way. Many people associate Christianity with the kind of religion that I practiced with my wife. It wasn't all bad, but there was that segment, that nasty, horrible segment. And the experience of discovering that you are the greatest impediment to the thing that you want most for the one that you love the most. I wasn't plotting murder. I thought I was doing what was good. That is not Jesus. And it is no mistake that Mark, who is developing the character of Jesus, piece by piece, entry by entry, he's building the resume of Jesus Christ in his gospel. And Mark is pitting Jesus against everyone. Because to follow Jesus is to go an utterly different way than every way. The wonderful thing I can tell you is that Jesus met me in my false religion. And I'm repenting. I wouldn't dare claim it's done. The rules, do you remember religion? I consistently live out a conviction, but also I obey, therefore I'm accepted. That gets flipped when you follow Jesus. I am accepted. Even on that car ride, when I am seeing the thing I've been blind to, the worst of me, I am accepted and I am loved. Therefore I obey. And the rules, there's still rules when you follow Jesus. Lots of them. Remember, he said when you fast. But the rules get subordinated or sometimes altogether eliminated by the person. We follow him. We follow Jesus, the Son of Man, as Mark's told us, the Son of God, the Messiah, the one for whom all of history turns. We follow the one who sees a man with a shriveled hand and he says, stretch it out, and it's done. That is what it is to be a Christian. Pray with me. Father, grant that we can sing the song that used to be so popular, I once was blind, but now I see. We keep discovering blind spots. Lord, help us to see this religious tendency. We are all religious. The only choice we get is who or what will follow. And the outcomes vary drastically. Help us to see. Help us to see you. Help us to see our world in new ways. Thank you for rules. Protect us from rules gone bad. Thank you for your grace and mercy. Thank you that you were looking at me that day like a father whose kid finally pedals on their own. You get it, Tim. With joy, I suspect. In your name we pray, and for your glory we live. Amen. Well, we are going to party in a little bit, and I suspect some of you are going to party somewhere else probably. We have a meeting. We're voting on the recommendation that the board has brought you, so we're going to stop for 5 minutes here. You don't have to rush out or anything like that, but we're going to have a meeting in 5 minutes, and then after that at 5:30, pizza and veggies are coming, and we're going to eat. Thank you for being here. And let me just say this, as we always end, go and be God's people. Go and may you learn to know the difference between following Jesus and dead religion. Go in peace. God bless.